Did you know that according to declassified documents, reality is actually a universal hologram? Cosmic consciousness is real, we live in an illusory matrix. Oh, and not only that, but you can prove it to yourself by going out of your physical body. All of that and so much more in this reading from the endlessly fascinating Declassified Gateway Process paper. By the way, if you're just stumbling across this is part 2 of a full read-through of this document. But trust me, you're going to want to hear this part in particular because we cover all of the above curiosities and more in pretty significant detail. It does get somewhat scientific and technical at times, but the payoff, philosophically and spiritually even, is just immense. Before we get into it, if you've been watching the channel, you know that I myself did a gateway retreat at the Monroe Institute a few months back. I'm going to resist the urge to elaborate upon that here because I did a whole video on it in which I shared the experience. And I also cover the frankly unbelievable history of all of this, why the CIA, why the intelligence community was interested in psi phenomena, consciousness, and everything this paper covers, and more. And with that, my friends, let's get back into the document. But before I forget, do like, subscribe, comment, share. The algorithm must be fed. Picking up where we left off, brain stimulation, point 9 on page 6. Bentov's biomedical model shows that this resonance is of considerable importance since it is directly transmitted to and impacts upon the brain. The resulting vibration is received and transmitted into the brain itself via the fluid-filled third left ventricles located above the brainstem. An electromagnetic pulse is then generated, which stimulates the brain to raise the amplitude and frequency of brainwave output. Just as Dr. Tremlow observed in his research on the effects of the hemisync tapes, also, the brain is contained in a tight membrane called the dura, which is, in turn, cushioned by a thin layer of fluid located between it and the skull. As the coherent resonance produced by the human heart in a state of profound relaxation reaches the fluid layer surrounding the brain, it sets up a rhythmic pattern in which the brain moves up and down approximately 0.005 to 0.010 millimeters in a continuous pattern. The self-referencing character of resonant behavior accounts for the body's ability to sustain this movement despite the minimal level of energy involved. In this way, the entire body, based on its own micro-motion, functions as a tuned vibrational system, which transfers energy in a range between 6.8 and 7.5 hertz into the Earth's ionospheric cavity, which itself resonates at about 7 to 7.5 hertz. Of this process, Bentov states, quote, "This is occurring at a very long wavelength of about 40,000 kilometers, or just about the perimeter of the planet. In other words, the signal from the movement of our bodies will travel around the world in about 1/7 of a second through the electromagnetic field in which we are embedded. Such a long wavelength knows no obstacles, and its strength does not attenuate much over large distances. Naturally, it will go through just about anything: metal, concrete, water, and the fields making up our bodies. It is the ideal medium for conveying a telepathic signal. Consequently, the gateway process is designed to rather rapidly induce a state of profound calm within the nervous system and to significantly lower blood pressure, to cause the circulatory system, skeleton, and all other physical organ systems to begin vibrating coherently at about 7 to 7.5 cycles per second. The resulting resonance sets up a regular repetitive sound wave which propagates in consonance with the electrostatic field of the Earth." Okay, so once again, this point about brain stimulation, fascinating. I have questions. Seems like a lot of this is based off of speculation. Not that it's not plausible, but... So again, this quote I'm pretty sure comes from Stalking the Wild Pendulum by Bentov. It sounds familiar to me. I think in the book he does provide some more evidence for this, but still, this relationship between brain waves and the electromagnetic field of the Earth is very, very interesting. Don't get me wrong, but I guess I would just love to see more evidence, or if this is something, again, that still holds up to modern scientific scrutiny. All right, point 10, energy entrainment. As the body is turned into a coherent oscillator vibrating in harmony with the surrounding electrostatic medium, the specific exercises included in the Gateway tapes enjoin the participant to build up the energy field surrounding the body, presumably by using energy from the Earth's field, which the body is now in training because of its ability to resonate with it. This puts the body's energy field into homogeneity with the surrounding environment and promotes movement of the seat of consciousness into the surrounding environment, partly in response to the fact that the two electromagnetic mediums are now a single continuum. Thus, the same process which moves the brain into focused coherence at steadily higher levels of frequency and amplitude so as to entrain analogous frequencies in the universe for data collection also promotes enhancement of bodily energy levels to a point adequate to permit the subject to experience an out-of-body movement when he is ready to do so. More will be said about this topic later. In addition, by resonating with the Earth's electromagnetic sphere, the body creates a surprisingly powerful carrier wave to assist the mind in communication activity with other human minds similarly tuned. Again, I come away from this point with similar feelings to point 9. And don't get me wrong, I'm not necessarily questioning anything specifically in terms of like if the method works. I guess I'm just questioning how they jump to these conclusions about the relationship between brainwaves, the electromagnetic field of the Earth, and consciousness. All right, point 11, consciousness and energy. Before our explanation can proceed any further, it is essential to define the mechanism by which the human mind exercises the function known as consciousness, and to describe the way in which that consciousness operates to deduce meaning from the stimuli which it receives. To do this, we will first consider the fundamental character of the material world in which we have our physical existence in order to accurately perceive the raw stuff with which our consciousness must work. The first point which needs to be made is that the two terms, matter and energy, tend to be misleading if taken to indicate two distinctly different states of existence in the physical world that we know. Indeed, if the term matter is taken to mean solid substance as opposed to energy, which is understood to mean a force of some sort, then the use of the former is entirely misleading. Science now knows that both the electrons which spin in the energy field located around the nucleus of the atom and the nucleus itself are made up of nothing more than oscillating energy grids. Solid matter, in the strict construction of the term, simply does not exist. Rather, atomic structure is composed of oscillating energy grids surrounded by other oscillating energy grids which orbit at extraordinarily high speeds. In his book, Stalking the Wild Pendulum, Itzhak Bentov gives the following figures. The energy grid which composes the nucleus of the atom vibrates at approximately 10 to the 22nd power hertz, which means 10 followed by 22 zeros. At 70 degrees Fahrenheit, an atom oscillates at the rate of 10 to the 15 hertz. An entire molecule composed of a number of atoms bound together in a single energy field vibrates in the range of 10 to the 9th hertz. A human cell vibrates at approximately 10 to the 3rd power hertz. The point to be made is that the entire human being, brain, consciousness, and all, is like the universe which surrounds him, nothing more or less than an extraordinarily complex system of energy fields. The so-called states of matter are actually variances in the state of energy, and human consciousness is a function of the interaction of energy in two opposite states, motion versus rest, in a manner described in the following paragraph. This makes sense, and this really seems to echo pretty modern theoretical field-based physics, at least from my very high-level understanding. All right, point 12, holograms. Should be a fun one. Energy creates, stores, and retrieves meaning in the universe by projecting or expanding it at certain frequencies in a three-dimensional mode that creates a living pattern called a hologram. The concept of a hologram can be most easily understood by using the example cited by Bentov. Once again, you gotta say that this paper really lives and dies, for better or worse, by Bentov. Anyway, the concept of the hologram can be most easily understood by using an example cited by Bentov, in which he asks the reader to visualize a bowl full of water into which 3 pebbles are dropped. As the ripples created by the simultaneous entry of 3 pebbles radiate outward toward the rim of the bowl, Bentov further asks the reader to visualize that the to visualize that the surface of the water is suddenly flash frozen so that the ripple pattern is preserved instantly. The ice is removed, leaving the three-dimensional pebble still laying at the bottom of the bowl. Then the ice is exposed to a powerful coherent source of light, such as a laser. The result will be a three-dimensional model or representation of the position of the three pebbles suspended in midair. Holograms are capable of encoding so much detail that, for example, it is possible to take a holographic projection of a glass of swamp water and view it under magnification to see small organisms not visible to the naked eye when the glass of water itself is examined. The whole concept of holography, despite its scientific implications, has only been known to the physicists since the underlying mathematical principles were worked out by Denis Gabor in 1947. He later won a Nobel Prize for his work. Laboratory demonstration of Gabor's work only occurred years later following the invention of the laser. As biologist Lael Watson explains, the purest kind of light available to us is that produced by a laser, which sends out a beam in which all waves are of one frequency, like those made by an ideal pebble in a perfect pond. When two laser beams touch, they produce an interference pattern of light and dark ripples that can be recorded by a photographic plate. And if one of the beams, instead of coming directly from the laser, is reflected first off of an object, such as a human face, the resulting pattern will be very complex indeed, but it can still be recorded. The record will be a hologram of the face. So what they're starting to get at here is basically that holograms have this incredible property of a small part of the hologram itself being able to encode the whole. And this is going to have huge implications for the argument this paper is making about consciousness, in that we in many ways are a microcosm of the macrocosmic consciousness hologram. All right, so moving on. Point 13. Okay, case in point. Point 13, the part encodes the whole. Of further importance is the fact that even if we dropped our frozen hologram of the ripple pattern on the floor and broke it into a number of pieces, each individual piece would recreate the entire holographic image all by itself. The smaller the piece, the fuzzier and more distorted would be the resulting holographic projection, but the fact remains that the whole projection would nonetheless be made. The key to creating any hologram is that energy in motion must interact with energy in a state of rest, non-motion. In the foregoing example, the pebbles represent energy in motion, while the water, before its agitation by the pebbles, represents energy at a state of rest. To activate, or in effect, to perceive the meaning of a holograph, energy, in this case, a coherent light source such as a laser beam, must be passed through the interference pattern generated by interaction between the moving energy and the energy at rest. In the simple example given by Bentov, this requirement was fulfilled by holding the frozen interference pattern in front of the coherent light to project the three-dimensional holographic image, its, quote, meaning, into space. As Marilyn Ferguson, editor of Brain Mind Bulletin, tells us, quote, another feature of a hologram is its efficiency. Billions of bits of information can be stored in a tiny space. The pattern of the holographic photograph is stored everywhere on the plate. So there you go. Case in point, whole in point of anywhere in a given hologram. Point 4, here we go. The consciousness matrix. Point 14. The universe is composed of interacting energy fields, some at rest and some in motion. It is, in and of itself, one gigantic hologram of unbelievable complexity. According to the theories of Karl Pribram, a neuroscientist at Stanford University, and David Bohm, a physicist at the University of London, the human mind is also a hologram which attunes itself to the universal hologram by the medium of energy exchange, thereby deducing meaning and achieving the state which we call consciousness. With respect to states of expanded or altered consciousness, such as Gateway uses, the process operates in the following way. As the energy passes through various aspects of the universal hologram and is perceived by the electrostatic fields which comprise the human mind, the holographic images being conveyed are projected upon the electrostatic fields of the mind and are perceived or understood to the extent that the electrostatic field is operating at a frequency and amplitude that can harmonize with and therefore read the energy carrier wave pattern passing through it. Changes in the frequency and amplitude of the electrostatic field which comprises the human mind determines the configuration and hence the character of the holographic energy matrix, which the mind projects to intercept meaning directly from the holographic transmissions of the universe. Then, to make sense of what the holographic image is saying to it, the mind proceeds to compare the image just received with itself. Specifically, it does this by comparing the image received with that part of its own hologram which constitutes memory, by registering differences in geometric form and in energy frequency. The consciousness perceives, see Exhibit 2 on the next page, as psychologist Keith Floyd puts it, contrary to what everyone knows is so, it may not be the brain that produces consciousness, but rather consciousness that creates the appearance of the brain. So I think this point is really of the utmost importance. And now, this figure on the next page is one of, if not the most famous images from this whole report. But yeah, this point that we just ended on here, it's consciousness that produces the appearance of the brain, not the brain that produces consciousness. That in and of itself is a really huge point. But this whole concept of consciousness of the individual being like a fractured piece of the hologram of the whole is a really huge point. And then if we make that assumption, this idea that if you perturb the consciousness field of the human being with a different frequency, like Gateway does, you can therefore change its perception, you can change its level of consciousness, you can expand its consciousness, you can tune it in to different frequencies of reality or different energy systems, probably, as Robert Monroe would like to say. All right, point 15, brain in phase. The consciousness process is most easily envisaged if we picture the holographic input with a three-dimensional grid system superimposed over it in such that all of the energy patterns contained within it can be described in terms of three-dimensional geometry using mathematics to reduce the data to a two-dimensional form. Bentov states that the scientists suspect that the human mind operates on a simple binary go-no-go system, as do all digital computers. Therefore, once it superimposes a three-dimensional matrix over holographic information it wishes to interpret and reduces that information mathematically to two-dimensional form, it can completely process it using its fundamental binary system, just as any computer made by the hand of man can process volumes of data and make various comparisons between the data and information stored in its digital memory. Our minds operate in the same way, perceiving by comparison only. Bentov states the proposition this way, quote, "Our whole reality is constructed by constantly making such comparisons. Whenever we perceive something, we always perceive differences only. In states of expanded consciousness, the right hemisphere of the human brain, in its holistic, nonlinear, and nonverbal mode of functioning, acts as the primary matrix receptor for this holographic input while operating in phase or coherence with the right brain. The left hemisphere provides the secondary matrix through its binary computer-like method of functioning to screen further the data by comparison and reduce it to a discrete two-dimensional form." I'm not too sure what to think about this part about the brain operating in a similar way to binary with the go, no-go kind of analogy. I don't think it's super important to the central philosophy of the paper. Maybe I just need to chew this one over more, but anyway, that is my knee-jerk. Moving on to 16, evaluation. To the extent that Gateway succeeds in bringing about a reinforcement in energy matrix of the mind, it succeeds by expanding or altering human consciousness so that it can perceive without recourse to the intercession of the physical senses, such that ever more of the universal hologram, not, of course, accessible by sense perception, can ultimately be perceived and understood. Marilyn Ferguson has written that the theories of Pribram and Bohm appear to account for all transcendental experience, paranormal events, and even, quote, normal perceptual oddities. She goes on to say of Pribram, quote, "Currently he is proposing a startling, all-encompassing model that is generating considerable excitement among those intrigued by the mysteries of human consciousness. His, quote, holographic model marries brain research to theoretical physics It accounts for normal perception and simultaneously takes paranormal and transcendental experiences out of the supernatural by explaining them as part of nature. Like certain strange discoveries of quantum physics, the radical reorientation of this theory suddenly makes sense of paradoxical sayings of mystics throughout the ages. Yeah, this does make sense to me, and again, this sort of harmonizes with a trend I see among a lot of philosophers of consciousness, you know, like people like Bernardo Kastrup, people like Dr. Donald Hoffman, even John Vervaeke, you know, that there is nothing supernatural about expanded states of consciousness or consciousness, but at the same time, consciousness itself cannot be explained in merely classical physics, materialistic terms, because there are these like anomalous features of consciousness and perception in the human experience that just can't be reduced down to a physicalist framework. So then what they do is they expand the horizon of what is considered natural, which, you know, it makes a lot of sense. Like if you're dealing with a scientific system that accounts for something like quantum physics, considers something like the holographic universe, and that consciousness is a part of that universal hologram, you don't need anything supernatural because you have sufficient notions and theories to put consciousness in a lens that is, you know, natural, at least by those terms. All right, 17, self-cognition. To complete our outline of the process by which the mind achieves and exercises consciousness, we must also describe the mechanism which accounts for the aspect of human thought that differentiates it from consciousness of plants and animals, i.e. self-cognition. Humans not only know, but they know that they know. They are able to monitor the process of their own thinking and maintain awareness of it. Moreover, they can conduct a comparative assessment evaluating the functioning of their thought processes against various objective standards they have adopted. Human consciousness can do this because it has the capacity to duplicate aspects of its own hologram, project them out, perceive that projection, put it through comparison with the memory aspect, where its evaluation standards of measure are stored, of its own hologram, and measure or sense the differences using three-dimensional geometry, and then binary go, no-go pulse to yield verbal cognition about the self. Tempted to use the phrase word salad there, but I don't think it's nonsense. I don't think what he's saying is nonsense, but it's just another one of these classic run-on sentences that is just clunky to read and fully grok on the first go-through. But yeah, I mean, how can you not agree with the idea that there's something, you know, I don't want to like diminish other kinds of intelligence, because I think as humans we have a tendency to want to do that, but clearly there is something different about human consciousness, right? And we do have this ability that he's talking about to essentially project, create our own, if you want to call it, holograms or creations, and consider those and weigh them philosophically. You know, like think about something very practical like art, let's say. That is a kind of meaning human beings are capable of producing and reflecting upon in a way that is very central to what we are as creatures. All right, point 18, time-space dimension. Up to this point, oh, you're going to love this part. Up to this point, our discussion of the gateway process has been relatively simple and easy to follow. But now, the fun begins. Gateway involves more than just perception of those aspects of the universal hologram which can be accessed in the dimension of time-space as we know it. To explain how and why human consciousness can be brought to transcend the limitations of time-space is the next task which must be addressed. To do this, we must first appreciate what time and space are in order to understand how the dimension that they constitute can be transcended. Physicists define time as a measurement of energy or force in motion. In other words, it is a measurement of change. However, in order for energy to be in motion, it must first be limited in some way within the confines of some sort of vibratory pattern, so that its confinement gives it the capacity for being contained at a specific location, which is distinguishable from other locations, space. Energy which is not confined is force without limit, without dimension, without limits of form. It is infinity, cannot move because there is nothing beyond infinity, and is therefore outside the dimension of time. It is also beyond space because that concept implies that a specific energy form is limited to a specific location and is absent from other locations. But if energy is in the state of infinity, there are no boundaries, no here to differentiate from there, no sense of area. Energy in infinity means energy uniformly extended without limit. It has no beginning, no end, no location. It is conscious force, the fundamental primal power of existence without form, a state of infinite being. Energy in infinity is said to be completely at rest and therefore cannot generate holograms so long as it remains utterly inactive. It contains its inherent capacity for consciousness in that it can receive and passively perceive holograms generated by energy in motion out in the various dimensions which make up the created universe, but it cannot be perceived by consciousness operating in the active universe. Energy in this state of inactive infinity is termed by physicists as energy in its absolute state, or simply, quote, the absolute. Between the absolute and the material universe in which we experience our physical existence are various intervening dimensions to which human consciousness in altered states of being may gain access. Theoretically, human consciousness may continue to expand the horizons of its perceptual capacity until it reaches the dimension of the absolute, at which point perception stops because the absolute generates no holograms of or about itself. So some pretty key ideas here, I would say, in this point about the time-space dimension. You know, obviously we're just defining generally what time and space are, but we're also putting out, I guess, the sort of hypothesis that consciousness itself really is always part of this equation, whether if it's in a differentiated holographic form, as we're talking about here, you know, in that consciousness instantiates itself in an absolute universe worth of a panoply of ways, but its ultimate state is unified and at rest in the form of the absolute, and that we as human beings have the ability to perceive just a multitude of states between here and the absolute. And I mean, this really harmonizes with the world's spiritual traditions, particularly of the mystical flavor, right? In other words, the idea that we're all one, that underlying all of the apparent diversity, there is this absolute or this one or this unified mystery that we're all derivative of, or that we somehow differentiated out of. All right, 19, intervening dimensions. Since the absolute is conscious energy in infinity, i.e. without boundaries, it occupies every dimension to include the time-space dimension in which we have our physical existence, but we cannot perceive it. It overlays everything, as do many of the intervening gradients or dimensions, through which the energies of the universe pass on their way to and from their home in the state of infinity or the absolute. To enter these intervening dimensions, human consciousness must focus with such intense coherence that the frequency of the energy pattern, which comprises that consciousness, i.e. the brainwave output, can accelerate to a point where the resulting frequency pattern, if displayed on an oscilloscope, would look virtually like a solid line. Achievement of this state of altered consciousness sets the stage for perception of non-space-time dimensions because of the operation of a principle in physics known as Planck's distance. This is an aspect of quantum mechanics which applies to the fact that any oscillating frequency, such as a brainwave, reaches 2 points of complete rest which constitute the boundaries of each individual's oscillation, i.e. movement up or down. Without these points of rest, an oscillating wave pattern would be impossible, since the points of rest are required to permit the energy to change direction and thus continue vibrating between rigid limits. But it is also true that when, for an infinitesimally brief instant, that energy reaches one of its 2 points of rest and, quote, clicks out of time-space and joins infinity. See Exhibit 3, next page. That critical step out of space-time occurs when the speed of the oscillation drops below 10 to the 33 centimeters per second, Planck's distance. To use the words of Bentov, quote, Quantum mechanics tells us that when distances go below Planck's distance, which is 10 to the negative 33 centimeters, we enter, in effect, a new world, end quote. To return to our case in point, the human consciousness wave reaches such high frequency that the pattern of clickouts comes so close together that there is virtual continuity in it. Then a portion of that consciousness is actually postulated to establish and maintain its information collection function in those dimensions located between time, space, and the absolute. Thus, the almost continuous clickout pattern establishes itself in continuous phase at speeds below Planck's distance. But before reaching the state of total rest, human consciousness passes through the looking glass of time-space after the fashion of Alice beginning her journey into Wonderland. Wow. The gateway experience, with its associated hemisync technique, is apparently designed, if used systematically and patiently, to enable human consciousness to establish a coherent pattern of perception in those dimensions where speeds below Planck's distance apply. This holds true irrespective of whether the individual is exercising his consciousness while in his physical body, or whether he is doing so after having separated that consciousness from the physical body, i.e. the so-called out-of-body state mentioned earlier. Okay, so this is more esoteric, but this is really huge, and I'm going to have to think about this because this notion of clicking out, we would use this phrase all the time at the retreat to refer to when you're doing a hemisync meditation and you just like lose consciousness suddenly. When I talked about this in the other video, so I won't go on at length about this, but at first I really considered that to be just falling asleep during a meditation. But the phenomenology of clicking out versus falling asleep is different. And the more you ride the line between, metacognating, being self-aware, like understanding, okay, I am Michael, I am meditating, and then just suddenly losing awareness, and then you come back into, in my case, my Michaelness, the more you go in and out of those states, it's almost like you start to wear the line down or something. Like you start to become more aware in the quote-unquote clicked out state. And if I'm reading this correctly, it sounds like that's part of the point, that you gradually be able to come aware of these expanded states of consciousness that are like clicked out, that are beyond space-time. So this is really interesting. I'm probably going to reread or re-listen to myself read, as cringe as that is, that part a couple of times. All right, subatomic particles. The behavior of subatomic particles provides an interesting example of the phenomenon of clicking out discussed in the preceding paragraphs. In an article prepared for Science Digest magazine, Dr. John Gliedman? I hope glide sounds better than gleed. Mentions the way in which subatomic particles communicate with each other once their energy fields become entrained as a result of colliding with each other. The communication concerned is, of course, postulated to be occurring during the, quote, click-out phase, in the oscillation of energy forms comprising the subatomic particles concerned. It is this cause which accounts for the cross-communication at what in terms of space-time velocities would seem to include speeds in excess of light. In reality, Einstein's theory of relativity is not being invalidated, but rather the communication concerned is taking place outside the dimension of time-space to which the theory of relativity is strictly confined. Specifically, Dr. Gliedman tells us, quote, quantum theory postulates a kind of long-range Siamese twin effect whenever two subatomic particles collide and then go their different ways. Even when the particles are halfway across the universe from each other, it says they instantaneously respond to each other's actions. And in doing so, they violate relativity's ban on faster-than-light velocities. Indeed, regarding attempts to quantify what is known as the behavior of energy in dimensions apparently outside of time-space, Bentov speaks about, quote, courageous physicists who are working on the hypothetical particles called, quote, tachyons, which move at speeds higher than light. The speed of tachyons starts just above the speed of light and ranges all the way to infinite velocities. So I don't know a lot about tachyons. I've heard of them. But yeah, I mean, they're really talking about one of the core pieces of phenomena that occurs in quantum physics, right? The spooky action at a distance, as Einstein called it. entanglement. It really is like this is something that's taking place in a dimension that is completely behind time and space. You know, the quantum dimension where time and space and distance and all of these things just don't apply. And this is why you hear the term, you know, quantum non-locality all the time, because there are these states in which reality, or at least subatomic particles, can just completely transcend the rules of relativity. Like, you know, cause and effect doesn't apply. Transmission of information, like when you have two particles that are entangled, right? And they allude to this here, and you shoot those two particles in opposite directions, it doesn't matter how far apart those particles are. If you measure one particle, the particle that it's entangled with will instantaneously take on an opposite value. So like if you measure one particle and its spin is up, instantaneously at that exact moment that you measure its partner, the other particle's spin is down. And this isn't about violating Einstein's relativity. There is no information transfer occurring between those two particles. It's just a feature of the weirdness of quantum theory. I did a video on this a long time ago when some physicists won the Nobel Prize for breakthroughs in quantum theory. If you want to check it out, I will link it. Now that we've postulated the legitimacy of the assertion that the energy forms which compose consciousness can move beyond the time-space dimension, we need to turn our attention to the energy forms which inhabit those dimensions between time, space, and the absolute. In doing so, we may better perceive the form that reality assumes when we encounter it in those intermediate dimensions. In this context, Bentov tells us that, quote, the causal relationship between events breaks down. Movements become jerky rather than smooth. Time and space become grainy or chunky. Perhaps a piece of space can be traversed by a particle of matter in any direction without necessarily being synchronized with a piece of time. In short, a pair of events will occur in either time or space, the pair not being connected causally, but by a random fluctuation. What Bentov means is that inside the dimension of time-space, both concepts apply in a generally uniform way. There is a proportional relationship between them. A certain space can be covered by energy moving in either particle or waveform in a certain time, assuming a specific velocity virtually anywhere in the time-space universe. The relationship is neat and predictable. However, in the intermediate dimensions beyond time and space, the limitations imposed on energy to put it into a state of oscillating motion are not uniform as they are in our physical universe. A myriad of various distortions and incongruities are thus likely to be encountered, such that our nice, neat assumptions concerning the relationship between time and space, as we now know it in this dimension, do not apply. But even more important, access is opened to both the past and the future when the dimension of current time-space is left behind. So yeah, again, this idea that all of our assumptions about reality, you know, time and space, cause and effect, the way things in this physical layer of reality have to happen in a linear, like I said, cause and effect kind of way, just don't apply at some levels of reality, in some, I don't know if dimensions is the right word, but planes of existence. All right, 22, special status, out-of-body experience. Here we go. Although human consciousness can, with enough practice, move beyond the dimension of time and space and interface with other energy systems in other dimensions, the entire process is appreciably enhanced if that consciousness can be detached in large measure from the physical body before such interface is attempted. Once an individual becomes proficient in the technique of out-of-body movement and then reaches the point where he is able to break out of the time-space while out of his body, he gains the advantage of, quote, clicking out part of his enhanced consciousness while starting from a base located much closer to the dimensions with which he wishes to communicate. In other words, since he is starting from a point much, quote, higher up, to use an analogy from the time-space context, that part of his consciousness involved in clicking out will have much more time to interact with dimensions beyond time-space because less time is required to traverse intervening layers. Moreover, once the individual is able to project his consciousness beyond time-space, that consciousness would logically tend to entrain its frequency output with the new energy environment to which it is exposed, therein greatly enhancing the extent to which the individual's altered consciousness may be further modified to achieve a much heightened point of focus and a much refined oscillating pattern. As a result, a self-reinforcing process should ensue whereby the farther consciousness in the out-of-body state can be projected beyond the time-space dimension, the more its level of energy output would be enhanced, thus promoting the potential for still further travel. The tentative conclusion to be drawn is that the out-of-body state may be regarded as an extremely effective way of accelerating the process of enhancing consciousness and of interfacing with dimensions beyond time-space. If the practitioner of the gateway technique has a choice of concentrating on achieving and exploiting the out-of-body experience as opposed to concentrating his full efforts on expanding his consciousness exclusively from a physical base, the former would appear to promise much faster, much more impressive successes than does the latter. I will forever be in awe of these run-on angular sentences of our dear friend Lieutenant Colonel McDonnell here. But what he's saying is, to sum it up, being able to achieve the out-of-body state, being able to temporarily liberate yourself from your meat suit will allow your consciousness to achieve connections with these other energy systems or dimensions or, intermediary planes of reality between here and the absolute much more easily. Covering some good ground here. We've got a couple of pages of art, of figures coming up as well, so I think we might be getting close to a good stopping point, but we will continue. All right, point 22, absolute in perspective. It may be helpful at this point to pause and recap the major aspects of our intellectual journey from time-space to the realm of the absolute. It's crazy because I talk for so long during podcasts, but reading like this is just absolute murder on your voice by comparison, I think, because you just never stop. So yes, we will conclude soon. But anyway, we have spoken at some length concerning the incredibly complex hologram which is created by the intercession of energy patterns generated by the totality of all dimensions of the universe, time-space included. We have noted that our minds constitute energy fields which interact with various aspects of this hologram to deduce the information which is ultimately processed through the left hemisphere of our brains to reduce it to a form that we employ for the processes we call thinking. We have implied that this hologram is the infinite embodiment in active energy form of the infinite consciousness of the Absolute. It is the title we assign to that vast pool of energy in a state of perfect rest over which the physical universe is layered, and from whence it comes. Incidentally, Bentov uses the analogy of a very deep sea, comparing the still depths of the sea to the dimension of the absolute, while assigning the storm-tossed waves above to represent the physical universe with which we are familiar. The slightly agitated currents of the sea to be found in between the turbulent surface and the totally still depths represent energy in the process of either going into rest, i.e. approaching infinity, or coming out of rest. All right, I like that. Nice little dip into the sea analogy. It's all one ocean of consciousness. There are the depths that are completely at rest. Those depths are akin to the absolute. We in our physical world are akin to the surface of the ocean with all kinds of waves forming and dissolving and coming and going. From Big Bang to Taurus 24. Working from the widely accepted Big Bang theory, Bentov presents a conceptual model to depict the process of time-space evolution, the relative position of the universal hologram. That hologram is often called a torus because it is thought to have the overall shape of an immense self-contained spiral. Basing his thesis on recent studies concerning the distribution of quasars, quasi-stellar objects, and operating on the premise that in the universe, smaller processes tend to mirror images of larger ones, i.e. the pattern of electrons around the nucleus of an atom mirrors the way planets orbit their suns, and so on, Bentov postulates the following scenario. Taking his cue from the observed compatibility of quasars to eject enormously concentrated beams of matter from their interiors in a controlled non-concentric version of the quote Big Bang, he envisages a similar process occurring in the generation of the universe. See Exhibit 4 on the next page. Noting that those galaxies located to the north of our own galaxy are moving away faster than those located to the south, and that those to the east and west are demonstrably more distant. Bentov regards this as substantive evidence that the jet of matter which expanded into our universe has turned back upon itself, eventually forming an ovoid or egg shape. He sees matter in our universe entering the ovoid pattern following ejection from a nucleus composed of extremely compressed energy through a quote white hole. At the end of its trip to the far end of the ovoid, he sees it departing via a black hole. In such a model, time is observed to be the measure of the change which occurs as energy evolves into new, more complex forms as it progresses along the distance from the white hole side of the nucleus around the shell of this cosmic egg until it enters the black hole. In other words, as energy expelled from infinity and confined within limits by the conscious of the absolute achieves form and motion following ejection from the white hole at the top of the egg. Time begins as a measure of the cadence of this evolutionary movement as reality goes around the shell of the egg on its journey to the black hole at the far end. So again, straight out of Stalking the Wild Pendulum, this notion that the universe itself is in this sort of state of flux, of coming and going, this meta egg that is ever flowing from white hole to black hole in some kind of, cosmic reincarnation pattern, as depicted in this amazing image that you've probably seen many times at this point if you're interested in this document. Okay, we're going to wrap this with point 25, our place in time. The observed distribution of galaxies suggests that our particular universe is located near the top of the egg at the point where matter begins to fall back on itself, thus explaining the reason why the galaxies to the north are seen to be moving away more rapidly as they are caught up in the downturn of the stream of matter toward the far end of the cosmic egg. See Exhibit 5 on the next page. Layered over this cosmic egg is the absolute, which sustains the radiating nucleus from which the original jet of matter issued forth. As the stream of matter moves around the ovoid toward its destination at the black hole, where it will be reabsorbed into the radiating nucleus and then the absolute, it generates the interference pattern within the cosmic egg, which constitutes the universal hologram or torus. Since the torus is being simultaneously generated by matter in all the various phases of time, it reflects the development of the universe in the past, present, and future, as it would be seen from our particular perspective in one phase of time. By reflecting on this model, it becomes possible to see how human consciousness brought to a sufficiently altered or focused state could obtain information concerning the past, present, and future, since they all exist in the universal hologram simultaneously. In the case of the future, because all of the consequences of the past and present can be seen coming together in the hologram, such that the future can be predicted or seen with total accuracy. Quite a statement. Moreover, it is possible to see how the implosion of energy patterns would cross and recross to create an incredibly complex four-dimensional hologram or torus in spiral shape in reflection of the multidimensional developing pattern of evolution. All of the movements of the energies which comprise the universe leave their mark and hence tell their story throughout time. And we are going to wrap part 2 there, my friends. I'm going to do my best to turn around part 3 as expediently as possible. One more reminder, do like, subscribe, comment, share. It really is of the utmost importance. Subscribe to Third Eye Drops wherever you listen to pods. We've got hundreds and hundreds of transmissions with some really brilliant human beings. And also so much love and gratitude to everybody over at patreon.com/Third Eye Drops. It's a fantastic way to support the show directly, but you also get rewards. We have a patron-only Discord server. We do Zoom hangs once a month. On a related note, we're reading the truly fantastic Phenomena by Annie Jacobsen right now. If you're into this topic, I can't recommend that book more. But anyway, I and hundreds of other patrons would love to rap with you over in the Patron Wonder Lodge. This is to be continued, my friends. Part 3, the final installment of the Gateway read-through, will be coming soon. Much love until then.